A 6-year-old boy vanished in the middle of the day, inside one of America's busiest department stores. Not in a deserted parking lot, not on a lonely road. Inside a brightly lit Sears filled with shoppers, employees, and security guards. Less than 50 feet away stood a police station. For 27 years, one question refused to die. How could a child disappear from one of the safest places imaginable, without anyone stopping it? The investigation that followed would become one of the most controversial child murder cases in American history. Critical evidence disappeared. Witnesses contradicted one another. Multiple notorious killers were investigated. One suspect confessed, then took it back. Another has been argued over by investigators for decades. Even after police officially closed the case, many believed the biggest questions had never truly been answered. But this story isn't just about a murder. It's about how the loss of one little boy forced an entire nation to rethink how it protects its children. Every code atom announced inside a store, every Amber Alert that flashes across your phone, every missing child poster you've ever seen, part of that story begins here. Because before Adam Walsh became a symbol, he was simply a little boy excited to watch other kids play a video game. And within minutes, he was gone. Before we go back to that summer afternoon in 1981, I want to ask you something. Every time someone watches a story like this, Adam Walsh's name is remembered. Every comment, every share, every conversation helps ensure that children like him are never reduced to forgotten headlines. If you believe victims deserve to be remembered, not just for how they died, but for how they lived, consider subscribing. Together, we're preserving stories that changed history. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Long before his name appeared on newspaper front pages across America, Adam Walsh was simply a little boy growing up in South Florida. He was 6 years old. He loved cartoons. He loved baseball. He was fascinated by anything that seemed new or exciting, especially if it involved technology or games. Friends of the family remembered him as quiet around strangers but energetic at home. Once he felt comfortable, his curiosity seemed endless. He asked questions about everything, wanting to know how things worked and why people did what they did. To his parents, John and Reve Walsh, he wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a future headline. He was their only child. Like many young families in the early 1980s, the Walshes believed they were building a bright future. John was establishing himself in the hotel business, while Reve balanced family life with college classes and her own ambitions. Their home reflected optimism. School supplies for second grade would soon be needed. Summer still had a few weeks left. Life felt comfortably ordinary. Monday, July 27, 1981, began like countless Mondays before it. Nothing about the morning hinted that it would become one of the most studied days in American criminal history. Reve had several errands planned. One stop involved paperwork for Adam's upcoming school year. Another involved Sears at the Hollywood Mall. She had seen an advertisement for a household lamp that had finally gone on sale after months of waiting. It wasn't an exciting trip, just another errand. The kind families make every day without giving it a second thought. By late morning, the Florida sun was already baking the parking lot outside the shopping center. Inside, however, the mall offered cool air, bright lighting, and the familiar soundtrack of shoppers talking, cash registers ringing, and music drifting through department store speakers. The Hollywood Mall was busy. Parents pushed strollers. Teenagers wandered in groups. Employees restocked shelves. For anyone walking through its doors, it looked like one of the safest places imaginable. That sense of normalcy mattered, because every decision that followed was made inside an environment that appeared completely secure. After entering Sears, Adam's attention shifted almost immediately. Near the toy department, a demonstration console had attracted a crowd of children. Home video games were still a novelty in 1981. Many families couldn't yet afford one. Watching someone play was entertainment in itself. Children waited patiently for their turn. Others simply stood and watched. Adam stopped, his eyes fixed on the television screen. The colorful graphics, the electronic sounds, the excitement of the older boys taking turns. Reve noticed. She also noticed something else. The toy department was filled with people. Employees were nearby. Customers moved through every aisle. Nothing looked unusual. She told Adam she would quickly check another department while he watched the game. She wouldn't be gone long. Adam agreed. For any parent, it was the kind of decision that barely registered. There was no reason to think those few minutes would become the most scrutinized moments of her life. As Reve walked toward the home furnishings section, she searched for the advertised lamp. It wasn't on display. A sales associate explained that the employee responsible for that department was away for lunch. She left her name and telephone number, hoping someone would contact her when the item became available. The entire stop took only a short time. Then she turned back toward the toy department, expecting to find Adam exactly where she had left him. Instead, the group of children had disappeared. The demonstration console remained. The television still faced the aisle. But Adam wasn't there. At first, nothing seemed alarming. Perhaps he had gone looking for her. Perhaps he had wandered into the next aisle. Children do that. She called his name. No answer. She walked one aisle over. Then another. Still nothing. The feeling began slowly. Not panic. Not yet. Just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. She searched nearby displays. She checked areas that would naturally attract a curious 6-year-old. No Adam. She walked faster. Then faster still. Within minutes, concern became urgency. She approached Sears employees. They immediately began helping search the surrounding departments. Soon, an announcement echoed through the store asking Adam Walsh to report to customer service. Most shoppers barely noticed. Announcements like that happened from time to time. Lost children were usually reunited with their parents within minutes. But those minutes came and went. Another announcement followed. Employees searched restrooms, stockrooms, nearby entrances. Customers began looking beneath clothing racks and around display counters. The atmosphere inside the store changed. People who had been casually shopping only moments earlier now found themselves watching employees move quickly from department to department. Some joined the search. Others simply watched, hoping the missing boy would suddenly appear holding his mother's hand. He never did. Outside, traffic continued flowing along Hollywood Boulevard. Cars stopped at traffic lights. Pedestrians crossed the street. Life beyond the store carried on as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Inside Sears, however, every passing minute increased the possibility that this was no longer a routine missing child incident. It was becoming something far more frightening. What Reve Walsh couldn't possibly have known was that investigators would later spend years reconstructing these exact moments. Every movement, every witness, every decision. Some would become central to the investigation. Others would spark controversy decades later. And one decision made inside Sears that afternoon would remain the subject of intense scrutiny long after the store itself was gone. Because somewhere inside those ordinary minutes, someone knew something they didn't yet realize would matter. And the answers investigators desperately needed were already beginning to slip away. For a few moments, everyone inside Sears believed there had to be a simple explanation. Children wandered. Parents became separated from them all the time. Someone would find the little boy, bring him to customer service, and the day would continue. But as the search widened, that confidence began to disappear. Employees moved from one department to another, calling Adam's name. Stockrooms were checked. Restrooms were searched. Managers quietly coordinated with security personnel while trying not to alarm other shoppers. Reve Walsh refused to stop moving. She walked the same aisles repeatedly, hoping that somehow she had overlooked him. Every child she saw from a distance made her heart race. Every time she realized it wasn't Adam, the fear grew heavier. The announcements continued over the store's public address system. Each one sounded more urgent than the last. For many shoppers, they became background noise. For one mother, they marked the passing of precious minutes. Those minutes mattered. Modern investigators now know that the first hour after a child disappears is often the most critical. But in 1981, missing child investigations were handled very differently than they are today. There was no nationwide alert system, no social media, no smartphones capable of instantly sharing photographs, no coordinated emergency notification that could reach millions of people within minutes. What happened during those first moments depended almost entirely on the people inside that building. And those moments were slipping away. Eventually, someone made the decision every parent hopes never becomes necessary. Police were called. Just across Hollywood Boulevard stood the Hollywood Police Department. It was close enough to see from outside the store. That fact would later become one of the most discussed details of the case. Many people would ask the same question for decades. How could a child disappear so close to a police station? The answer wasn't simple. Officers responding that afternoon initially had no reason to believe they were dealing with a child abduction. Missing children were often located nearby. Some had wandered into neighboring stores. Others had followed another family by mistake. Investigators approached the situation based on what they knew at the time. Unfortunately, reality was moving much faster than anyone realized. As officers gathered information inside Sears, they began asking employees exactly what they had seen. The answers weren't always consistent. Some remembered seeing Adam near the video game display. Others believed he had walked away with older boys. Some couldn't remember seeing him at all. Witness memories, especially during stressful situations, are rarely perfect, but every small detail now carried enormous importance. One employee recalled a disturbance near the toy department involving several boys gathered around the game display. Accounts differed about exactly what happened. Security personnel had reportedly intervened after an argument. Children were separated. Some were escorted toward different exits. Investigators would later spend years examining those moments. Who was present? Which children left together? Did Adam leave willingly because he believed he was simply following everyone else? Or had something entirely different happened? No one could answer those questions with certainty. As the afternoon continued, concern spread beyond the walls of Sears. John Walsh received the phone call every parent dreads. His son was missing. He immediately headed toward Hollywood. The drive felt endless. Traffic lights became obstacles. Every mile seemed longer than the one before. By the time he arrived, dozens of people were already searching. His first instinct was simple: find Adam. He believed, as any father would, that his son had to be nearby. Children don't simply disappear, especially not from crowded department stores in broad daylight. Or so everyone believed. Searches expanded into the parking lots surrounding the mall. Employees walked between rows of parked cars. Volunteers searched landscaped areas. Nearby businesses were notified. People looked beneath vehicles, around dumpsters, behind loading docks, anywhere a frightened child might have wandered. Nothing. As daylight slowly began giving way to afternoon, the realization became impossible to ignore. This was no longer an ordinary missing child report. Something had gone terribly wrong. If you've stayed with us this far, thank you. Stories like Adam's deserve more than a passing glance. If you believe carefully researched documentaries can help preserve the memories of victims and remind us why these cases still matter, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people discover these stories and helps ensure children like Adam are never forgotten. Now let's continue. Investigators soon began interviewing everyone who might have crossed paths with Adam that day. Store employees, security staff, customers, parents, children. Even the smallest observation could become the missing piece. A man thought he had seen a young boy outside the store. Another believed he noticed a child climbing into a vehicle. Others couldn't be certain whether what they remembered happened before or after the announcements. The growing number of tips created another problem. Not every lead was reliable. Some conflicted with one another. Others couldn't be verified. Even so, detectives understood they couldn't ignore any possibility. Time was now working against them. Meanwhile, the Walsh family refused to wait passively. Friends arrived to help. Volunteers organized search parties. Photographs of Adam were copied and distributed throughout South Florida. Local media interrupted regular programming. Newspapers prepared evening editions with his picture. Across the community, strangers who had never met Adam began looking for him. Parents searched neighborhoods after work. Truck drivers kept watch along highways. Business owners placed his photograph in their windows. Complete strangers became united by one hope: bring the little boy home. Yet beneath that hope was another emotion few wanted to say aloud: fear. Because with every passing hour, investigators still couldn't explain the most basic question. How had a 6-year-old vanished from one of the busiest stores in South Florida without anyone clearly seeing what happened? That question would soon become even more troubling, because detectives were about to receive information suggesting Adam may never have left Sears the way anyone originally imagined. And if that information was accurate, the investigation was about to take a direction that no one, not his parents, not investigators, not the community, was prepared for. As the sun dipped below the South Florida skyline, the search entered its most difficult phase. The optimism that had fueled volunteers throughout the afternoon began to fade. Every road that had been searched without success, every empty parking lot, every unanswered lead, made one possibility harder to ignore: Adam might not simply be lost. By nightfall, the Walsh family faced a reality no parent should ever have to endure. Their son wasn't coming home that evening. John and Reve barely left the Hollywood Police Department. Detectives continued interviewing witnesses while volunteers searched neighborhoods with flashlights. Friends answered telephones, hoping every ring would bring news that Adam had been found safe. Instead, each hour brought only more uncertainty. The following morning, Adam's photograph appeared across newspapers and television broadcasts throughout South Florida. His smiling face looked out from television screens in homes where parents instinctively pulled their own children a little closer. Phone lines at the police department began ringing constantly. People called with possible sightings, possible suspects, possible vehicles. Some tips were sincere, others were mistaken. Detectives followed every lead they reasonably could. Most went nowhere. For John and Reve, every telephone call became an emotional roller coaster. One moment, hope; the next, disappointment. Still, they refused to believe the worst. Like many families of missing children, they held on to the possibility that Adam had been taken by someone who would eventually let him go. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope. Meanwhile, investigators expanded their search far beyond Hollywood. Roadblocks were considered. Nearby communities were alerted. Law enforcement agencies across Florida received Adam's description. Yet, investigators faced challenges that would seem almost unimaginable today. In 1981, there was no national database that rapidly connected missing child investigations across jurisdictions. There was no Amber Alert system to interrupt broadcasts. The internet didn't exist. A photograph had to be physically distributed. Information traveled far more slowly. Every hour lost made the investigation increasingly difficult. The Walsh family wasn't willing to wait for others to do the work. John threw himself into the search. Friends, co-workers, and complete strangers joined him. Thousands of flyers were printed and handed out. Businesses displayed Adam's photograph in their windows. Volunteers walked fields, canals, neighborhoods, and wooded areas. Truck drivers kept watch along highways. Pilots searched from the air. The community responded with extraordinary compassion. But compassion alone couldn't answer the question everyone kept asking: where was Adam? As days passed, media attention intensified. National news organizations began covering the disappearance. Across America, families followed updates with growing concern. Parents who had never heard of Hollywood, Florida, suddenly knew the face of one little boy. Many wondered how something like this could happen in broad daylight. Some quietly began changing how they shopped with their own children. Without realizing it, Adam's disappearance was already influencing parents across the country. Yet investigators still lacked the one thing they desperately needed: evidence. There was no confirmed eyewitness to an abduction, no reliable vehicle description, no ransom demand, no clear suspect, only questions. And each unanswered question widened the mystery. Before we continue, we'd like to hear from you. Cases like Adam's remain emotionally difficult decades later because they remind us how quickly ordinary life can change. If this story has affected you so far, leave a comment below with the words, "We remember Adam." Simple acts of remembrance matter. They remind families still searching today that the world hasn't forgotten children whose stories deserve to be told. Nearly 2 weeks after Adam disappeared, investigators received devastating news. On August 10, 1981, 2 fishermen were near a drainage canal alongside Florida's Turnpike in Indian River County, roughly 120 miles north of Hollywood. Floating in the water was something they initially struggled to identify. As authorities arrived and examined the scene, hope gave way to heartbreak. The remains belonged to a young child. Dental records would later confirm what John and Reve had desperately prayed would never be true. It was Adam. The news sent shockwaves across the nation. For the Walsh family, time seemed to stop. The search that had consumed every waking hour was over. But the questions had only multiplied. Investigators now faced a homicide investigation unlike any they had expected. How had Adam traveled more than 100 miles from Hollywood? Who had taken him? Why? The crime scene offered only limited answers. The passage of time and environmental conditions had destroyed or obscured much of the physical evidence investigators hoped to recover. Even so, forensic examination established critical facts about the nature of the crime. Those findings would shape every investigative theory that followed. Detectives worked to reconstruct Adam's final known movements. Every witness statement from Sears was reviewed again. Security personnel were interviewed repeatedly. Customers who had been inside the store were contacted once more. Investigators hoped that someone, somewhere, had noticed one small detail overlooked during those chaotic first hours. Sometimes, a forgotten observation becomes the breakthrough. This wasn't one of those times. Instead, the investigation grew more complicated. Rumors spread rapidly. Speculation filled newspapers. People claimed to have seen suspicious strangers. Others believed they recognized vehicles near the mall. Some reports contradicted established facts. Others couldn't be verified at all. Separating useful information from noise became one of the investigation's greatest challenges. Still, detectives pressed forward. Every new lead demanded attention because ignoring the right one could mean overlooking Adam's killer. But while investigators searched for answers, another story was quietly beginning. One that would eventually transform American law enforcement. One that would change how parents, police departments, and retailers respond when a child disappears. John Walsh had lost his son. He could never change that. But in the months ahead, grief would slowly evolve into determination. Before he became one of America's most recognizable advocates for victims, before millions watched him pursue fugitives on national television, he was simply a father refusing to let his son's death be forgotten. That journey, however, would have to wait, because investigators were about to encounter a series of suspects whose names would dominate headlines for years. Some appeared frighteningly plausible. Others confessed. Some recanted. And decades later, one question would continue dividing detectives, journalists, and the public alike. Did authorities identify the right killer? Or did the truth disappear along with the evidence that might have settled the case forever? By the end of 1981, investigators had accumulated thousands of pages of reports. Every witness interview, every anonymous tip, every possible sighting, every theory. Yet despite months of work, the central question remained unanswered. Who had taken Adam Walsh? For the Walsh family, the uncertainty became its own form of punishment. Grief is painful, but grief without answers is relentless. Every morning began with hope that someone, somewhere, would finally make the phone call that changed everything. Instead, investigators found themselves chasing one lead after another. Some seemed incredibly promising. Others collapsed almost immediately. One after another, the names came, then disappeared. One early suspect attracted investigators because of his history involving crimes against children. Detectives spent considerable time examining his movements, interviewing people who knew him, and comparing his whereabouts to the known timeline. Nothing placed him at Sears. the evidence wasn't there. Another individual became the focus after someone claimed he had privately admitted responsibility for Adam's murder. The allegation sounded credible enough to investigate. Detectives searched his vehicle, interviewed co-workers, verified his work schedule. Ultimately, they could not connect him to the crime. Again, the trail went cold. As frustrating as these dead ends were, investigators understood something important. Every suspect they eliminated narrowed the field. Even when a lead failed, it brought them one step closer to the truth. Or so they hoped. Years passed. America changed. Technology evolved. But Adam's case remained open. Then, in 1991, another name suddenly entered the conversation. One already known across the world. When police arrested serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer in Wisconsin, investigators everywhere began reviewing unsolved murders that might be connected to him. His crimes shocked even seasoned detectives. Naturally, people began asking whether he could somehow be connected to Adam Walsh. There were reasons investigators looked closely. Dahmer had lived in Florida for part of 1981. Witnesses from the Sears parking lot described seeing a suspicious man. Years later, some believed the person they remembered resembled Dahmer. But eyewitness memory is notoriously unreliable, especially after many years. Investigators interviewed Dahmer directly. He denied any involvement. More importantly, they found no physical evidence linking him to Adam's murder. To this day, some people continue to believe Dahmer deserves greater scrutiny. Others argue the available evidence simply isn't strong enough. It's one of several unresolved debates surrounding this case. And it would not be the last. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Based only on the evidence you've heard so far, not rumors, not internet theories, who do you believe investigators should have focused on? Leave your thoughts in the comments before we reveal the suspect who would eventually become the official answer. Now, let's continue. The investigation took another dramatic turn with the emergence of a drifter named Ottis Toole. Toole was already serving prison sentences for other violent crimes. He had an extensive criminal history, and he possessed something investigators had been searching for: a confession. According to investigators, Toole admitted killing Adam. At first glance, it appeared the case might finally be solved. But almost immediately, problems began to surface. Some details in his confession matched known evidence. Others didn't. Certain facts he described had never been made public. Yet other parts of his story were clearly incorrect. Then came another complication. He changed his account. Later, he withdrew it entirely. Then, after some time, he confessed again. This pattern continued repeatedly over the years. Each new version solved some questions while creating new ones. Investigators faced an enormous challenge. Were they dealing with a genuine confession from the killer, or with a man known for making false confessions to notorious crimes? Toole had admitted responsibility for numerous murders throughout his life. Many of those admissions proved false. Some investigators viewed him as deeply unreliable. Others believed that beneath the inconsistencies lay important truths only the real killer could have known. The debate intensified. Meanwhile, evidence that might have settled the issue forever was slipping away. During the investigation, authorities examined a vehicle associated with Toole. Investigators believed it might contain forensic evidence. Photographs were taken, samples collected, but as years passed, critical pieces of evidence were misplaced or deteriorated. Some materials were no longer available for modern DNA testing. Other evidence had been stored improperly. Additional items simply could not be located. Each discovery became another painful reminder of how investigative standards in the early 1980s differed from those used today. Had the same crime occurred decades later, advances in forensic science might have produced entirely different results. Instead, detectives found themselves trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. For the Walsh family, every revelation was bittersweet. Each promising lead carried hope. Each collapse reopened old wounds. John Walsh later became increasingly vocal about the investigation's shortcomings. He believed mistakes made during the earliest days had permanently damaged the search for justice. Some investigators agreed. Others defended the difficult decisions made under enormous pressure with the resources available at the time. History would continue debating those questions. But one fact remained beyond dispute. The case had transformed far beyond the disappearance of one child. It had become a national conversation about how America investigates crimes against children. The public demanded better. Families demanded better. Eventually, lawmakers began listening. Yet, before Adam's legacy could reshape the country, authorities first had to answer one final question. After more than a quarter century, would investigators officially identify Adam Walsh's killer? Or would one of America's most heartbreaking child murder investigations remain forever suspended between certainty and doubt? By 2008, 27 years had passed since Adam Walsh disappeared from the Sears store in Hollywood, Florida. Nearly 3 decades. Children who had been Adam's age in 1981 were now raising children of their own. Technology had transformed criminal investigations. DNA science had solved cases once thought impossible. Yet Adam's murder remained one of America's most discussed unsolved child homicide investigations. Then, in December 2008, the Hollywood Police Department made an announcement that would once again place Adam Walsh's name in headlines across the country. Following a comprehensive review of decades of investigative records, detectives concluded that Ottis Toole was responsible for Adam's abduction and murder. Police Chief Chad Wagner publicly acknowledged that mistakes had been made during the original investigation and apologized to the Walsh family for those failures. For John and Reve Walsh, it marked the end of one chapter, but not necessarily the end of every question. Because while investigators believed the available evidence pointed to Toole, there would never be a criminal trial. There would be no cross-examination, no jury, no verdict delivered inside a courtroom. Toole had died in prison years earlier. The official conclusion rested on decades of investigative work, witness statements, confessions, and the evidence that remained, not on newly discovered DNA or a conviction beyond reasonable doubt. For some investigators, that was enough. For others, questions lingered. Could every inconsistency in Toole's confessions truly be explained? Had lost evidence prevented absolute certainty? Could modern forensic testing have answered questions that history no longer could? Reasonable people reached different conclusions, and perhaps they always will. What cannot reasonably be disputed, however, is something far more significant: the impact Adam Walsh had on America. Before we finish this story, we'd like to ask one final favor. If documentaries like this matter to you, stories that focus on real victims, careful research, and the lessons history still has to teach us, please consider subscribing. Not because numbers matter, but because remembrance does. Every view, every comment, every share helps ensure that children like Adam are remembered as people whose lives changed the world, not simply as names in old newspaper archives. And if Adam's story stayed with you today, write "never forgotten" in the comments. His family spent decades making sure his name would continue to protect other children. Together, we can make sure that legacy continues. In the months following Adam's death, John and Reve Walsh faced a decision that few people could even imagine. They could retreat from public life, or they could fight. They chose to fight. Instead of allowing unimaginable grief to define the rest of their lives, they devoted themselves to changing the system that had failed so many families. At the time Adam disappeared, there was no coordinated national response for missing children. Law enforcement agencies often worked independently. Information traveled slowly. Families frequently found themselves organizing searches with little guidance or support. John Walsh became one of the nation's most outspoken advocates for reform. Working alongside other families, child advocates, and lawmakers, he pushed for changes that many people now take for granted. One of the most significant developments was the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that has helped law enforcement recover hundreds of thousands of missing children and provides resources to families during their darkest moments. John later became the host of America's Most Wanted. Week after week, millions of viewers watched as fugitives were profiled on national television. The program helped generate tips that contributed to the capture of hundreds of wanted criminals. Its message was simple. Justice doesn't expire. Neither should determination. Adam's legacy also lives on every time a child is reported missing inside a retail store. Many major retailers now activate Code Adam, a rapid response procedure that immediately mobilizes employees, secures exits, and searches the building when a child cannot be located. That protocol exists because of one little boy who never made it home. His story also helped inspire broader conversations that eventually contributed to nationwide improvements in missing child investigations, public awareness campaigns, and emergency response practices. Today, parents instinctively photograph their children before family outings. Stores train employees to react immediately when a child disappears. Law enforcement agencies coordinate more rapidly than they did in 1981. Technology can distribute a missing child's photograph across an entire state within minutes. These protections weren't created by chance. They were built because families demanded change after tragedies like Adam's. Looking back, it's tempting to remember Adam Walsh only through the lens of the crime. But that would overlook who he really was. He wasn't born to become a symbol. He wasn't meant to become the face of legislation or investigative reform. He was a 6-year-old who enjoyed simple childhood pleasures. He laughed. He dreamed. He trusted the adults around him, like every child should be able to do. His life was heartbreakingly short. His influence has lasted for generations. More than 4 decades later, parents who have never heard every detail of the investigation still benefit from the reforms his case inspired. Children have been reunited with their families because systems changed. Employees respond differently. Police respond differently. Communities respond differently. History cannot undo what happened on that July afternoon in 1981. Cannot return a son to his parents. Cannot erase decades of unanswered questions or investigative mistakes. But history can teach. It can remind us that ordinary days sometimes change without warning. That vigilance matters. That every missing child deserves an immediate, determined response. And that one family's refusal to give up transformed grief into lasting change. Adam Walsh's story began with an ordinary shopping trip. It ended by changing the way an entire nation thinks about protecting its children. Some cases are remembered because of the mystery they leave behind. Others are remembered because they change the future. Adam Walsh's story is remembered for both. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next documentary. And until then, never stop remembering the victims, because behind every case file was a life that deserved far more time.